The Concord had a word for the sand in the warden's pit, and the word did not mean sand. It meant asterisk ledger. It meant the place where a debt was written down in a language that could not be argued with. 1,200 years of species had come to the Ossuary Plaza on the station called Thrankavath, and 1,200 years of species had stood at the rail above that white circle and read the ledger, and understood, in the wordless way that fear understands, exactly where they stood in the order of things. The sand was bleached bone pale. It had been shipped, ton by ton, from a world that no longer had a name on the charts. It drank sound. A footstep in it made no noise at all, which was, everyone agreed, the worst part. At the 11th hour of the station's cycle, on the day the human petition was scheduled to be resolved, 11,000 delegates filled the tiers above the pit and waited to watch a small ceremony that everyone present had already decided the meaning of. Nell Okoro-Vance, who was 8 years old, had not decided the meaning of anything. She was busy drawing. She sat in the third row of the human delegation's box with her boots swinging, her knees pressed together to make a desk, and her mother's field notebook open on them. The notebook was old. Its cover was the dull green of a thing that has been carried through weather. The corner had been gnawed by something on a planet Nell had never seen, and the spine was mended with 3 strips of orange tape, and the pages smelled, if you put your nose right down into them, like dust and rain and the ghost of a woman who had been dead for 2 years and 4 months. Nell was drawing the Vethun usher who stood at the end of the aisle. She was doing his mantle wrong, and she knew it. She erased, blew the crumbs away, tried again. Nell, Teodora Vance did not look down when she said it. Teo's eyes were on the pit, on the 8 sealed gates around its rim, on the gold towers, on the long white sweep of nothing. Notebook away. I'm not bothering anybody. Notebook away, love. Nell closed it. She did not put it away. She held it against her chest with both arms, the way she had held it on the transport out from Saul, and on the transport before that, and in the corridor outside the room where they had told her about the ice slide on Caveth 9, and her mother's beacon going quiet at the bottom of it. Teo felt the shape of that against her ribs without turning. She was 41 years old. She had been a search and rescue swimmer for 19 of them, which meant she had spent her working life going into places specifically designed to kill people and coming back out with somebody else breathing. She had exactly one skill, in her own estimation, and it was this: she got in front of things. She had married Adiz Okoro because Adiz had laughed at her the first time they met, laughed with her whole throat at something Teo had not meant to be funny, and because Adiz went into places designed to kill people too, only she went in to look at them. Teo had loved her with the particular helplessness of a shield that has fallen in love with a hand that will not stop reaching. And then a shelf of blue ice on a world with a number instead of a name had done what Teo had spent 19 years preventing, and had done it 4,000 light years from where Teo was standing. And Teo had learned that a shield is only a shield if it is their asterisk. So now she was there, always, every day since. She was the human delegation's security liaison because that job had a desk on this station, and the child was on this station, and Teo Vance was not going to be 4,000 light years from anything ever again. Below them, a bell rang in a key that human ears heard, as a kind of pressure behind the eyes. "That's the Arbiter," said Ambassador Idris Quan Marchetti, and straightened his collar with the exact motion of a man who has read a summary and not a document. "Right. Everyone stand for this bit. Smile. Look grateful. It's ceremonial." "It's a pit," Teo said. "It's a asterisk, symbolic asterisk pit. It has drains." The ambassador chose not to hear that. The Arbiter of the right came out onto the ceremonial balcony at the head of the plaza, and 11,000 delegates rose. Sedonvallo stood 2.5 meters tall on 4-jointed legs, and his chiton was the deep polished brown of old furniture, and his mantle of office hung from shoulder to floor in 9 folds, one for each of the Concord's founding sons. He was 206 years old. He had presided over the rite of the Pale Warden 14 times. 14 species had come to this plaza and made their offering, and 14 times Unvallo had lifted his hand and spoken the ancient formula, and 14 times the great gate had opened, and afterward the conquered had welcomed a new civilization into its arms, humbled, chastened, and taught asterisk. That was how Unvallo thought of it, taught. The rite was a teacher. He believed this the way a man believes in his own hands. He raised those hands now, and the plaza fell into the total silence of a species that has been trained. "Let the ledger be opened," Unvallo said, and the translators in 11,000 ears rendered it in 11,000 tongues. "Let the petitioner be weighed." Down in the human box, Vance's spine went very cold, because she had read the document. All of it. Including the appendices, including the 800-year-old rulings, including the part that Ambassador Quan Marchetti had skipped because it was written in Old Vethun, and the machine translation had rendered it as asterisk procedural formalities of selection. She leaned across 2 seats. "Idris, who chooses the offering?" "We do, obviously." "We'll send Dorn, he's a synthetic. It's a nonsense, it's theater." "Who asterisk chooses asterisk Idris?" And on the balcony, Arbiter said Unvallo said the words he had said 14 times before. "The petitioner does not choose. A species that chooses its own offering offers only what it is willing to lose. The conquered chooses. The conquered takes the one the petitioner would keep." He lowered his eyes to the human box, and his mandibles moved in the small, precise gesture that meant, among the Vethun, this is not personal, this is the law. "The unarmed, the unarmored, the unchosen, let the offering stand." For a moment nobody in the human box moved, because for a moment nobody in the human box understood. Then 11,000 faces turned, and 11,000 pairs of eyes, compound, slitted, stalked, filmed human, found the third row. And Nell Okoro-Vance, who was 8 years old and holding a green notebook against her chest, looked up from her lap and said, "Me." Vance was out of her seat before the word finished. Later, the recordings would show that it took her 1.1 seconds to reach the aisle, and that she had put herself between the child and the entire Ossuary Plaza with her arms out and her body squared and her weight low, in the stance she had learned at 19 for holding a doorway in a flooding compartment. It was a very good stance. It was, in that plaza on that day, completely meaningless, and some part of Tio knew it while she was still moving. "No," she said. The conquered marshals were already coming down the aisle. They wore no weapons. They did not need to. A conquered marshal was 4 meters of articulated ceremonial patience, and there were 9 of them, and behind them was a station, and behind the station was a civilization of 40,000 worlds, and behind that was 800 years of everybody agreeing that this was how it was done. "Liaison Vance," said the lead marshal gently, "please resume your seat." "She is 8. "Yes. She is asterisk 8 years old." "The right does not exempt the young," said the marshal, and there was nothing in its voice that wanted to hurt her, and that was the thing Tio could never afterward explain to anyone who had not been there, that the worst part was how asterisk kind asterisk they all were. It exempts no one. That is the mercy of it. If it exempted the young, then a species could hide behind its young. This way, all are equal before the warden. "Idris," Tio said without turning her head, "Idris, tell them." Ambassador Quan Marchetti was on his feet. He was a clever man, a genuinely clever man, and he had gotten humanity this far through the tariff arbitration, through the corridor rights, through the 11-year application on cleverness. And now he stood in the 3rd row of a box above a pit with his mouth open and no clever thing in it. "We withdraw the petition," he said, his voice cracked. "We withdraw effective immediately. Log it, we withdraw." Arbiter Unvallo's mandibles moved. "The petition may be withdrawn," he agreed. "The right may not. The right began when the bell rang. It ends when the sand is red. He turned his long, patient head toward the human box, and for the first time he looked directly at the small human being in the third row, and he felt he would testify to this later under oath. With his mantle of office folded in his lap like a dead animal, he felt nothing at all. He had trained himself to feel nothing at all. It had taken him 90 years, and he had been proud of it. "Child, come down." And Nell Okoro-Vance stood up. She did it because a tall grown-up had told her to, and 8-year-olds do that. And afterward the whole galaxy would try to make it into courage. And Nell would tell them, every time, patiently, into every microphone that was ever put in front of her. "No. I was so scared I couldn't feel my hands. I want people to know that. You can be so scared you can't feel your hands and still do the next thing." Tio turned and caught her, went down on one knee in the aisle and caught her by both arms, and the noise she made was not a word. "Look at me," Tio said. "Look at me, baby, look right here." "Are they going to put me in with the wolf?" Nell said. Because she knew what the warden was. Of course she knew. Every child on every world in the Concord knew what the warden was. It was in the songs they sang in the creches on Vethun Prime. It was in the frightening picture book that Nell's own creche teacher had confiscated from a boy named Paul in the third week of transit. The Pale One, the White Death, the last ghost of Iscarvel, who has eaten 40 champions and never once been fed. Nell had drawn it in her notebook twice. She had drawn it wrong both times, because the pictures all made it look angry, and Nell had told her teacher that she didn't think it looked angry in the recordings. She thought it looked *tired, and her teacher had said that was a very sweet thing to say and had changed the subject. "They are not," Tio said. "They are not. I will not let them. Do you understand me? I have never lied to you. You did about the tooth. I have never lied to you about anything that mattered *, and I am telling you." And then the marshals were there, and Tio Vance, who had held a doorway against 40 tons of water in the dark, discovered what it was to be lifted. Not struck, not hurt. Lifted *, the way you would lift a chair that was in the way, by 4 articulated arms that did not even bother to hurry, and set down 3 meters back and held. She fought. It is important to say that she fought. The recordings show it, and the recordings are what changed a galaxy, and in them you can see a 41-year-old woman throw herself against the Concord 4 times 5, 6, and you can hear the sound coming out of her, and it is not a heroic sound. It is the sound a person makes. Nell watched her aunt fight. She would remember it her entire life. Then a marshal put one long, careful hand on her shoulder, and Nell said, "Wait, wait, please." And she was not begging for herself. She had turned around. She was holding out the notebook. "Hold it," she said to Tio. "It's Mum's, it'll get sandy." Tio Vance stopped fighting. Everyone who saw the recording says it is that moment, not any of the others, that breaks them. Not the pit. Not the wolf. A child in a white ceremonial corridor, handing a battered green notebook back over 4 meters of empty air to a woman being held by giants, because she was worried about the pages. The marshal, to its eternal and permanent credit, carried the notebook back, placed it in Tio's hands. "Returned to its post." "Nell," Tio said. "Nell, Nell." "Rule 4, Nell called back from the mouth of the corridor in a voice that was doing its absolute best. "Right." And then the gate closed between them. The corridor down to the sand was 11 meters long and had no decoration of any kind, because the Concord had understood, 8 centuries ago, that decoration would only give the eye something to hold. Nell walked it alone. Her legs did not feel like her legs. Her ears had filled up with a high, thin ringing, and her mouth had gone completely dry, and she noticed, she actually noticed, and wrote it down later, because she was her mother's daughter and her mother had written down everything, that her body had gotten very *quiet*, as if it had decided to stop asking questions and simply carry her. She thought about Rule 4. The rules were on the inside front cover of the green notebook, in her mother's terrible handwriting, and Nell had read them so many times that they had stopped being words and become something more like the shape of her own hands. Adiz Okoro had written them for herself, at 26, before her first field season, and she had never revised them. Rule 1. You cannot make a wild thing trust you. You can only make yourself safe enough to be chosen. Rule 2. It is not deciding whether to hurt you. It is deciding whether it is safe. These are different questions, and you must answer the second one. Rule 3. Nothing that is afraid of you can love you. Take the fear away first. Everything else is downstream. Rule 4. Sit down. Be small. Be boring. Yawn if you can manage it. Look at the horizon, not the animal. Put your hand where it can be reached, and then, this is the hard part, Ada. This is the only hard part. Wait to be invited. Rule 5. If it comes, do not celebrate. Celebration is a threat. Breathe. Somewhere above her, muffled by 11 meters of stone, 11,000 delegates were making a low sound. It was not cheering. The conquered did not cheer at the right. It was worse than cheering. It was the sound of a very large number of people leaning forward. The inner gate ground open. Light came in. The sand was so white that it hurt, and beyond it, across 40 meters of ledger, the great black arch of the warden's gate stood already open, and something moved in the dark of it. Nell Okoro-Vance, 8 years old, of Earth, stepped out onto the sand. Her footfall made no sound at all. The Pale Warden came out of the dark, the way whether comes over a ridge. It did not run. That was the first thing that was wrong, and the delegates in the lower tiers, the ones who had seen the right before, the connoisseurs, the ones who came every time, felt it immediately, the way an audience feels a missed cue. The warden always ran. The warden came out of that gate like a landslide with teeth, and the whole point, the entire architecture of the ceremony, was that the offering had 4 seconds to understand what was happening to them, and then did not have to understand anything ever again. It walked. It was 4 meters long from nose to haunch, and it stood taller at the shoulder than a grown human, and it was white. Not the white of snow, which is blue underneath. The white of bone left out in the sun for a long time. Its pelt hung in ropes and mats over a frame that had once carried 300 kilos of muscle and now carried rather less, and the ribs showed under the fur like the beams of a wrecked ship under sand. And the eyes were the pink red of a wound, and they had no lashes left at all. There were 41 white lines burned into its flank. The handlers cut one for every champion. It was a bookkeeping thing. Nobody had ever asked the warden whether it wanted to be a book. It stopped 9 meters from the gate and looked at the small human standing on its sand. And in the third row of the human box, held by 2 marshals with her dead wife's notebook crushed against her sternum, T.O. Vance stopped breathing entirely. Rule 2 *, Nell thought. Her body was still very quiet. It had carried her 11 meters down a corridor and 4 meters out onto sand, and now it stood her still, and her heart was going so fast that it had stopped feeling like separate beats and had become a single continuous pressure in her throat, and she was so frightened that the edges of the world had gone soft and gray. She looked at the animal, and here is the thing that the entire Concord of 9 Suns, 40,000 worlds, 11,000 delegates, 206 years of Arbiter said on Valo's life, had never once done in 800 years on that sand. She looked at it. Not at the teeth. The pictures were all teeth. The songs were all teeth. Nell looked at the rest of it, because her mother's first rule was that the teeth are never the information, and what she saw made a small sound come out of her that was not fear. She saw that it was thin. She saw that it was standing wrong on its left forequarter, the shoulder held high and stiff, the weight shifted back, the way Mr. Adebio's old dog had stood on the bad hip in the last year, and Mr. Adebio used to say, "She's not grumpy, love, she's sore, and sore looks like grumpy from the outside." She saw the 8 goad towers ranged around the rim of the pit, and the long black lances slung in them, And she was 8 and she noticed this. And 3 separate xenoethology institutes would later publish papers about the fact that she noticed this and no adult in the plaza did. She saw that the warden was not looking at asterisk her asterisk. It was looking asterisk past asterisk her. At the towers, its ears were not forward, they were flat and turning and flat again. It is not deciding whether to hurt you asterisk, said her mother's handwriting, from the inside cover of a green notebook 4 meters above and a whole world away. It is deciding whether it is safe. Oh, Nell said, out loud on the sand, in the silence of 11,000 people leaning forward. Oh, you're scared too. And she sat down. It should be said plainly, because a great deal of nonsense was written about it afterward, that Nell Okoro-Vance did not sit down bravely. She sat down the way a person sits down when their legs are about to stop being legs. She went down hard on her backside, and the impact jarred her teeth together, and she said, "Ow," in a very small voice, and then she stayed there because getting up seemed enormous. But her mother's rules had gone into her the way a language goes into a child, which is to say beneath the level where decisions are made. And so what her body did next, it did without asking her. She pulled her knees up and made herself smaller. She turned her face away, 45 degrees, and looked at the wall of the pit instead of the wolf, because look at the horizon, not the animal. She let her shoulders drop. She let her hands go loose. She put her left hand down on the sand beside her hip, palm up, open, fingers slack. Put your hand where it can be reached. And then, because she was 8 and terrified and doing her best, and because her mother had written that this was the trick, this was the one that always worked, this was the cheat code of the entire animal kingdom, Nell Okoro-Vance yawned. It was the fakest yawn in the recorded history of the species. It was a catastrophe of a yawn. It came out as a long, shaky asterisk with a crack in the middle of it, and her eyes screwed shut, and a tear came out of the left one and ran down into her ear. Wait to be invited. She waited. 9 meters away, the Pale Warden stopped moving. Not the stillness of a predator. The Concord had built an entire mythology out of the Warden's stillness before a kill. There were poems. And this was not that. And every single being in the plaza who had ever seen a frightened animal in their lives knew instantly, in the gut, in the marrow, that this was not that. The great white head came down and to the side low until the jaw nearly brushed the sand. The ears flattened, then came up. The nostrils worked. And the Warden's tail, that ragged white flag of a tail, which had not moved in the memory of any living handler on Threnkaveth, moved. Once, a short, low, uncertain sweep close to the ground. Somewhere in the 4th tier, a Vethun delegate of the naturalist order stood up and said, "That is a greeting," in a voice that carried across the whole silent plaza, and was immediately pulled back down into her seat by her horrified colleagues. The Warden took a step. T.O. Vance's whole body convulsed against the marshals holding her, and one of them, the one who had carried the notebook, said very quietly, "Do not shout. If you shout, it will startle. Do not shout." And T.O. Vance, who had spent 19 years learning that the most important thing you can do in a catastrophe is the thing you least want to do, bit down on the inside of her own cheek until she tasted iron, and did not shout. Another step. The Warden came across the ledger with its head low and its shoulders stiff and its breath going in the ragged saw of an old animal in pain. And it came slowly, and it kept stopping, and every time it stopped it looked at the gold towers, and every time it looked at the gold towers something in the plaza got quieter and worse. Because they could all see it now. All of them. 11,000 delegates from 40,000 worlds, sitting above a pit they had come to be entertained by, watching the most feared creature in the Concord of 9 Suns creep across 40 meters of white sand toward a sitting child, and checking, over and over, whether it was going to be punished for it. 3 meters out it lay down. It did not lie down comfortably. It went down in stages, the way a thing goes down when the going down hurts. The good foreleg first, then the haunches, then a long, terrible, controlled collapse of the bad shoulder, and a grunt that was audible in the highest tier of the Ossuary Plaza. Then it stretched its neck out flat along the sand, and put its chin down, and pushed itself forward with its back legs, dragging, shuffling on its belly, in the dust, the white death of Iscarvel, the eater of 40 champions, until its enormous scarred muzzle came to rest a hand's breadth from the small open human palm lying on the sand. And it stopped. And it waited. Nell was still looking at the wall. She could feel it, the heat of it. The breath of it moving the fine hairs on her arm, in and out, a bellows the size of a room. The smell of it was ammonia and old wet fur, and something else underneath, something sweetish and wrong that she would later learn was the smell of an infection that had been living in a shoulder for 11 years. Rule 5. Do not celebrate, breathe. Nell Okoro-Vance breathed. Then, without turning her head, moving her arm about the distance of a page turning, she laid the back of her fingers against the side of the Pale Warden's jaw. The plaza made a noise. One noise, 11,000 throats, and then nothing at all. The warden closed its eyes. That was all. It closed its eyes, and it let out a breath that went on and on and on, longer than seemed possible, a breath that had apparently been held for a very long time, and its whole vast frame went slack against the sand. And the tail moved again, and the child said, in a wobbly voice that the pit's own acoustics carried up into every tier and every recording device, and within 9 hours, into every home on 40,000 worlds. "Hello, Hein, okay, you're okay, I've got you." Arbiter said Unvallo stood on the ceremonial balcony, with his hands still raised. He had been standing that way for some time, long enough that the strain had begun in his lower joints. He was aware of it distantly, the way one is aware of weather in another country. 14 times. 14 times he had stood here, and 14 times the sand had been read, and the ledger had said what it always said, which was, "You are prey and the conquered is not, and now you know the difference, and you may come inside." He had believed that. He needed it to be said clearly later to the tribunal, that he had believed it, that he was not a cruel man but something worse and more common, a man who had accepted an inheritance without ever once opening the box. His hands were still raised, because he did not know what to do with them. The formula for a kill was 3 words. The formula for a refusal did not exist. In 8 centuries, no offering had ever been spared, and so no one had ever written the sentence that would end the ceremony, and said Unvallo, arbiter of the right, keeper of the ledger, second of the 9th fold, stood on a balcony above a child with her hand on a monster's face, and discovered that his entire civilization had no words for mercy in this room. Beside him, Prefect Havan Othsarek, master of the towers, said, "Arbiter, the right is failing." "Yes," Unvallo said. "It has not been fed in 9 days. It is supposed *2. "Yes." "Arbiter, there are 11,000 witnesses, and the recording is going out on the Concord feed, and the * thing is lying down." Havan's mandibles were clicking, a rapid distressed stutter. "Give the order." And this is the moment. Every historian agrees. Not the sand, not the sitting down, not the hand, this. A balcony, 2 officials, 6 seconds of silence. "Give the order," Havan said again. Said Unvallo did not give the order. He stood there with his hands in the air and his mantle hanging in its 9 folds, and something moved in him that he had spent 90 years training out of himself, and it was too slow, and it was too late, and Havan Othsarek turned to the tower master's rail and put his hand on the brass and said in the old formula, "By the ledger and the 9, correct the beast." The goads fired. They were not weapons, technically. The Concord was very firm on this point in its literature. They were * correctives *. Sonic lances, tuned across 8 centuries to the auditory architecture of a single species, delivering a pulse that a Vethun could not hear at all, and that a human perceived only as a faint pressure and a wrongness behind the sternum. To an Ossuary, it was a spike driven through the skull. The Pale Warden came off the sand, as if the ground had exploded. Nell had one full second of understanding, the body against her hand going rigid, the head snapping up, the terrible high scream that came out of it, a sound that no one in the plaza had ever heard from the warden, and that several delegates later described as the single worst sound of their lives. And then she was falling backward, scrambling, her palms burning in the sand, and there was white above her, filling the sky, 400 kilos of agony. And the entire Ossuary Plaza rose to its feet as one and screamed. Vance broke a marshal's wrist getting to the rail. She never denied it, she never apologized for it. It is in the record. At the moment the goats fired, Liaison Okoro-Vance, unarmed, 41 years old, tore free of 2 conquered marshals, went over a 2-meter ceremonial rail, and dropped 9 meters onto the sand of the warden's pit, and landed badly, and got up on a broken ankle, and ran toward the thing that had eaten 40 champions with absolutely nothing in her hands. She was 11 meters away when she saw what was actually happening, and her legs stopped working, and she went down on her knees in the white sand and stayed there. The warden had not attacked Nell. The warden had covered her. It stood braced above the child with its 4 legs planted around her small huddled body, and its head was up and back, aimed at the towers, and its ruined mouth was open, and it was screaming at the goads, screaming, not roaring, a raw and terrible and pleading sound. And every time a lance pulsed, the great white body flinched down hard, and its legs buckled, and it caught itself, and it did not move, and it did not run, and it did not step on her, not once. Not in 91 seconds of continuous fire. 91 seconds, they counted afterward, frame by frame. Nell was on her back underneath it, her hands were up. She had both hands buried in the matted fur of its chest, and she was not screaming, and she was not crying, and 11,000 delegates and a broadcast feed reaching 40,000 worlds heard an 8-year-old human girl shouting, in a small cracked voice, over and over, into the belly of the white death of Iscarvel. Stop it, stop hurting him, stop hurting him. And on the balcony, Arbiter said Anvalo looked down at the ledger, at the sand, at the child and the shielding beast and the woman on her knees, and at the 8 towers of his own civilization, pouring pain into an animal to make it kill a little girl in front of an audience. And he saw the right of the Pale Warden. Saw it for the first time in 206 years. Whole and entire and exactly as it was, with nothing over it. Said Anvalo lowered his hands and turned, and struck the tower master's arm off the brass rail with a violence that startled every being on the balcony, and said, in a voice that came out of him like a hinge tearing, "Cease fire, cease fire, cease fire." The goad stopped, and in the enormous ringing silence that followed, the Pale Warden of Iscarvel swayed on its feet above a human child, and did not fall, and turned its head, and looked up at 11,000 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. And every single one of them froze. The medical wing of Threnkavath Station had 11 beds, and had never used more than 2 at once. Nell Okoro-Vance sat on the 3rd one with her boots off and her feet swinging, drinking something warm out of a cup with both hands, while a conquered physician of the Tellurid order, a small, damp, deeply upset being who looked like a folded umbrella and spoke in apologies, went over her with a scanner for the 9th time and found, for the 9th time, exactly nothing. Not a scratch, not a bruise, sand in her hair, sand in her ears, one skinned palm from the scramble backward which she had done to herself. 400 kilos of the most dangerous animal in the Concord of 9 Suns had stood over this child for 91 seconds while being tortured, in an enclosed space, on unstable footing, and had not so much as stepped on her foot. "It is not possible," the physician kept saying wretchedly. "It is not possible, I am so sorry, it is not possible." "He was careful," Nell said. "Yes." "He was really careful. He kept his back leg up the whole time so he wouldn't put it down on me. I felt it. He was shaking." She drank. Her hands were steady, which the ship's counselor would later describe as the single most alarming thing about her. "Is somebody looking at his shoulder?" The physician of the Tellurid order did not answer, because the answer was that a Concord veterinary team had put 8 sedation darts into the Pale Warden while it stood swaying over the sand, and had dragged it back through the black gate on a mag sled, and had chained it, as it had been chained for 61 years, in a stone hold beneath the pit, and had not looked at its shoulder, because looking at its shoulder was not a thing that anybody had ever thought to do. Okoro-Vance sat in the next bed with her ankle in a field cast and her hands wrapped around her knees, and had not spoken in 40 minutes. She had a broken ankle, a fractured wrist, a marshal's blood on her sleeve, and a hole in the center of her chest that she could not find the edges of. She had been on her knees. That was the thing. When it mattered, when it was actually happening, the thing she had reorganized her entire life around, the emergency, the water in the dark, Okoro-Vance had been on her knees in the sand 11 meters away, and the person who had gotten in front of the danger had been a monster, and the person who had known what to do had been 8. Nell said. "Oh, you jumped off a wall." "Yes." "That was really stupid." "Yes," Tio said, and her face broke all at once like ice going out on a river, and she put both hands over it. Nell got down off her bed and climbed up onto Tio's and sat against her side, and put her sandy head under her aunt's chin, and held on, and did not say anything, because sometimes the animal just needs you to sit down and be quiet and let it come to you. After a while Tio said thickly into her hair, "How did you know?" "Rule 2, Nell said. "It wasn't deciding about me. It was deciding about them." "Nell." Mum wrote it down, a pause, a very small voice. "She was right about everything, Tio. She was right about all of it, and nobody ever listened to her, and she died, and they still won't listen to her." Okoro-Vance held on to her wife's daughter in a Concord medical bay 4,000 light years from a shelf of blue ice, and understood, finally, and far too late, and just barely in time, that she had spent 2 years trying to protect Nell from the world, and that Adiz had spent her whole life trying to give it to her. The recording went out. The Concord had not thought to stop it, because in 800 years there had never been a reason to stop it. The rite was a public teaching, and its lesson was supposed to teach itself. By the time anyone in the Ossuary Chancery understood what was happening, the feed had run for 206 seconds and been mirrored 11 million times, and there was no version of the next 1,000 years in which that could be taken back. The galaxy watched a child sit down in the sand. It watched her yawn, the terrible fake yawn, the tear running into her ear, and it watched the white death of Iscarvel crawl to her on its belly and put its face in her hand. And then it watched the Concord of Nine Suns turn on the goads. That was the part. Everyone assumed afterward that the bond was the part. It was not. The bond was the hook, the goads were the wound. 40,000 worlds sat in their homes and their creches and their orbital habitats, and watched their own civilization spend 91 seconds trying to force a starving, crippled, terrified animal to kill a little girl on camera. Because the ceremony required it. Because the asterisk ledger required it. And something happened in the collective throat of the Concord that had not happened in 8 centuries. On Vethun Prime, a naturalist order archivist named Sethu Voraneth resigned her post at 11 hours past midnight and released, unlawfully and irreversibly, 4,000 hours of unedited handler telemetry from the warden's hold, going back 61 years. By the 3rd day, the phrase was everywhere, in 11,000 languages, sprayed on walls, cut into the hulls of grain haulers, sung, "Stop hurting him." They kept Nell and Tio in diplomatic isolation for 9 days. It was, the Chancery explained, for their protection. It was, Tio said, at high volume into several official faces, house arrest with a fruit basket. Both things were true. Nell spent the 9 days working. She had the green notebook back, sandy, none the worse, and she filled 40 pages of it, and she requested, through the ambassador, through the marshals, through anyone who would stand still long enough, a copy of the warden's telemetry. They gave it to her because it had already leaked and there was nothing left to protect, and because a Bethune clerk in the Chancery basement had watched the feed 11 times and could not sleep. It arrived as 61 years of audio. The Concord had recorded the warden's hold continuously since the day it was installed, because the Concord recorded everything, and no one had ever listened, because the file was labeled, in the indexing system of the Ossuary Chancery, animal vocalization and semantic archive only. Nell Okoro-Vance, 8 years old, sat cross-legged on a bunk in diplomatic isolation with a borrowed headset over her ears, and listened to it. She listened for 2 days. On the evening of the second day, she took the headset off and went and stood in front of Tio, who was on a calm call with Earth about lawyers, and waited to be noticed, and when she was noticed she said, "He does it in 6s. Baby, He does it in 6s asterisk Tio." Nell's face was doing something Tio had not seen it do in 2 years and 4 months. It was doing what a D's face used to do. The noises, they're not random. There's a low one and it always comes with 5 others always in a pattern, and then it stops, and then it does a asterisk different asterisk 6, and there's one he does every single time the lights go down, every night, 61 years, the exact same 6, and then he waits. She was talking too fast. She had 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. He waits, Tio. Like 14 seconds, every night. He says something and then he waits for an answer. Tio Vance looked at the child. Then she cut the call to Earth in the middle of a sentence. They brought in Dr. Rennick Oyalaran because he was the only comparative linguist on the station, and because he was extremely bad at politics, which turned out to be exactly the qualification the moment required. He came in irritable and left the room 4 hours later with his hands shaking. He came back the next morning with 3 colleagues, one of them a Bethune, all of them white-faced or the species equivalent, and by the end of the week there were 19 of them working in a converted cargo bay with the telemetry mapped across every wall, and the thing they had found had a shape now, and the shape was very simple, and it was going to take the Concord of 9 Suns apart at the joints. It was a language. Not signals, not effect calls. Language, with a grammar, with recursion, with a case system that marked whether the speaker had witnessed a thing or been told it, with an entire register, an entire lush and intricate register, whole minutes of it, that they eventually, tentatively, identified as asterisk narrative past. The warden was not making noise in the dark. The warden was telling stories in the dark. 61 years of them. "He's reciting," Rennick said on the 9th day in a cargo bay at 4 in the morning to a room containing an ambassador, a security liaison, a Bethune defector, and an 8-year-old girl asleep sitting up in a cargo chair with a green notebook open on her lap. Every night. The same cycle, about 11 months long, and then he starts again from the beginning. It's not raving. It's the structure is asterisk liturgical asterisk, it's got refrains, it's got look at the witness marking, look at this, he switches. Here he's the witness. Here he's not, here he's reporting. He's keeping a record of them, of the ones who aren't there. The ones who aren't there, Tio repeated. His people, said the Bethune Sethu Voraneth, who had thrown away 200 years of career and could not stop staring at the wall. He is saying their names. He is saying their names into an empty room every night for 61 years so that they will not stop being said. Nobody spoke. And the 6 part call it lights out, Tio said finally, the one he waits after. Rennick Oyelaran, who had a doctorate and a mortgage and no religion whatsoever, put his hands flat on the table to keep them still. "It's the roll call," he said. "It's the hearth call. Every Ossuary hearth group did it at dark. It's all over the ethnographic notes the Concord took asterisk before they decided the Ossuary weren't people, and then buried in an appendix. You call and the others answer, and that is how you know who came home." He swallowed. "He calls, and he counts 14 seconds, and nobody answers, and then he goes to sleep." In the cargo chair, without opening her eyes, Nell Okoro-Vance said, "I answered." Every head in the room turned. "On the sand," she said. She still had not opened her eyes. She was 8 and she had been awake for 19 hours, and she was so tired that the words came out flat. He said his 6, right down at the end, right in my ear when he put his head down. And I said hello. Arbiter said Anvalo was relieved of the right on the 4th day and confined to his chambers on the 6th. And on the 11th day he walked into the cargo bay by himself, without escort, without his mantle, and stood in the doorway of a room full of people who had every reason to hate him. T.O. Vance was on her feet, with the cast still on her ankle before anyone else moved. "Get out. Liaison Vance." "You chose her asterisk." T.O.'s voice did not rise. That was the frightening part. "You looked at a box full of humans, and you picked the one who came up to your knee, and you did it because you wanted the room to asterisk hurt." "Yes," said Anvalo said. T.O. stopped. The Vethun stood in the doorway with his hands hanging and his chiton dull and unpolished, and he was, she realized, extremely old, and he had not slept. "You are entitled to know that I have made no defense," he said. "There is none. I will say to you what I have said to the tribunal. I was 6 years old when the Concord took Iscarvel. My hearth was on the 3rd transport. I remember the ice, and I remember the singing from the surface, and I remember my mother putting her hands over my ear plates so that I would not hear it, and I remember asking her what was singing, and I remember what she told me." He was not looking at T.O. He was looking at the wall of sound. "She told me, nothing, my love, only animals." The cargo bay was very quiet. "For 200 years I have kept that sentence in a locked room in my chest," Anvalo said, "and I built a career on the door of it, and I stood on a balcony 11 days ago, and a human child of 8 years kicked the door in with one hand." His mandibles moved. "I did not lower the goads out of virtue, liaison. Understand me. I lowered them because I could no longer asterisk here over the singing." T.O. Vance stood in a cargo bay with a broken ankle, and did not know what to do with her face. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because they are going to kill him," said Anvalo. The proposal had come out of the preservation faction that morning, and it was very reasonable, and that was what made it obscene. The Pale Warden the motion held was a public safety hazard whose containment protocol had catastrophically failed. The animal was aged, diseased, and in chronic pain. The humane course, the asterisk merciful course, the course that would allow the Concord to close a regrettable chapter and move forward together toward reform, was euthanasia. Painless, immediate, followed by a full and sincere abolition of the right, a memorial, a fund, and a statue. They would abolish the right. They would burn the pit. They would apologize magnificently for 800 years. They just needed the witness dead first. "If he speaks," said Anvalo said into the silence of the cargo bay, "then he is a person. And if he is a person, then he was a person 61 years ago when they put the collar on him. And if he was a person then, so were the 400,000 on the surface of Iscarvel, and so was every voice my mother told me was an animal, and the Concord of Nine Suns did not conduct a asterisk pacification." His head came up. "It conducted an extermination, and then it took the last survivor and it put him in a hole, and for 8 centuries it made frightened children walk out onto his sand so that we could all watch him do to them what we did to him. And that is the ledger, that is what is written in that sand." He looked at last at the small girl asleep in the cargo chair. The vote is in 9 days, he said. They will win it. They have the fold, they have the chancery, and they have the entire moral weight of not wanting to have been monsters. His voice was perfectly steady, unless someone makes him speak in front of them. Nell Okoro-Vance opened her eyes. He'll speak, she said. He just won't do it to you. She slid down out of the chair and picked up her mother's notebook and looked up at 206 years of Vethun authority with sand still in her hair. Take me to him, said Nell. He's got something in his shoulder and it's been there 11 years and I want it out. The argument about whether to let her go down there lasted 6 hours, and T.O. Vance lost it. She lost it to a Vethun veterinary surgeon who put a scan of the warden's left shoulder on the wall and stood back from it and said nothing, because nothing was necessary. 40 centimeters of black. A gold lance tip, snapped off at the haft, buried at an angle under the scapula and grown around by 11 years of bone. The tissue for a hand's width in every direction was the gray-green of something that had been quietly dying for a decade. That is why he cannot run, the surgeon said. That is why he could not run at the right. He has not been able to run since the year 1109. She adjusted the scan. He has been in constant pain for 1/10 of his life, and the file says *lame, aggression unchanged, no intervention indicated. So sedate him, Tio said. Sedate him and cut it out. We have sedated him 11 times in 61 years, and every one of those events is on his chart as a restraint incident, and every one of them is why he screams when a Vethun in a coat comes within 9 meters of his chain, said the surgeon. We can put him under. He will fight it at his age with that heart, with that infection, and he will fight it because the last 11 times a coat came, it came with a needle and a collar. She turned. Liaison. If we take him down by force, there is a real chance he does not come back up. And if he does, we will have spent the only trust that exists in this station on a sedative 9 days before he has to stand up in front of the assembly and be a person. He does not have to be anything, Tio said. He has to be alive. He has to be both, said Anvalo, or he will be neither. And T.O. Vance turned around to say something unforgivable, and found that Nell was already sitting on the floor by the door with her boots off, lacing them back up, in the particular businesslike silence of an 8-year-old who has decided. She sat down on the ledge outside the hold and looked at her. Talk to me, Tio said. You'll say no. I might talk to me anyway. Nell finished the second boot. Then she sat with her arms around her knees and looked down the long stone throat of the corridor toward the black door with the 4 bolts on it, and Tio watched her be frightened. She was very frightened. She was not hiding it, and she was not performing it, and T.O. Vance had spent 19 years around people in extremis and had never seen anybody carry fear as honestly as this child carried it. He came to me, Nell said, on the sand. He didn't have to. He was hurting the whole time and he came anyway, and then they hurt him more and he still didn't go. He stood there and let them do it, and he kept his leg up so he wouldn't stand on me. She wiped her nose with her wrist. You're going to say it's not my job. It isn't. It's not anybody's job, Tio. That's how it got to be 11 years. T.O. Vance closed her eyes. She thought about a shelf of blue ice. She thought about the 2 years since, and the corridors she had walked ahead of this child, and the doors she had opened first, and the way she had begun, without ever deciding to make Nell's world smaller and smaller and smaller. A room inside a room, a place where nothing could reach her because nothing could reach anything. She thought about her wife's handwriting. You cannot make a wild thing trust you. You can only make yourself safe enough to be chosen. And she understood, sitting on a stone ledge under a torture pit at the far end of a galaxy, that she had been trying to keep Adi's daughter safe by putting her in a hold. Rules, Tio said. Nell's head came up. You get rules, Tio said. Her voice was almost level. Because I am not your bodyguard down there, I'm your backup, and backup gets rules. Ready. Ready. Rule 1. I am on the other side of that door and it is open and I can see you the entire time. Rule 2. You tell me before you touch him, every time, out loud. Rule 3. And here her voice went just slightly and she took a breath and put it back. Rule 3. If I say asterisk out asterisk, you come out and you do not argue with me and you do not finish what you're doing and you trust that I am not saying it because I'm scared. Because I will be scared. I'm going to be so scared, Nell. And I'm going to say it anyway if I mean it. Do you believe me? Nell Okoro-Vance considered this with enormous seriousness. Yes, she said. Then go on, Tio said, and she said it steadily, and she got up on her broken ankle and walked to the black door and undid the bolts herself. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it was the single hardest thing she had done in her life, and it was the first thing she had ever done that Adiz would have been proud of. The hold was 9 meters by 9, and the ceiling was low, and it smelled the way a wound smells. There was a drain in the middle of the floor. There was a chain, and the chain was as thick as a man's arm, and it ran from a ring in the stone to a collar of black alloy that had been welded shut 61 years ago around a throat that had been considerably thinner then. There was a water trough. There was nothing else in the room. There had never been anything else in the room. In 61 years, the Concord of Nine Suns had not given the Pale Warden of Iscarvel so much as a stone to look at. He was lying against the far wall with his back to the door. Nell stopped just inside. Behind her in the doorway, Tio Vance stood with her weight on her good leg, and her hands loose at her sides and every single muscle in her body screaming. The white head lifted, turned, the red eyes found the girl. And the tail moved, that same low, uncertain sweep along the stones, and the warden made a sound that came up out of the floor of him. 6 notes, low, rising, and in the corridor outside, in a knot of 19 linguists and 1 disgraced arbiter clustered around a monitor, Rennick Oyalaransu put his hand over his mouth. That's the hearth call, he whispered. He's calling the roll, he's calling asterisk her. Hi, said Nell. She sat down, cross-legged on the cold stone, 3 meters from a chained apex predator, and she did not go closer, and she did not reach, and she put her hands palm up on her knees and looked at the wall instead of at him. I'm going to be really boring, she told the wall. That's the whole plan. Mum said if you're boring enough for long enough, they come. It took 4 hours. Nobody moved in the corridor for 4 hours. Nobody spoke. The ambassador came down at the 2nd hour, looked through the doorway, and sat down on the stone floor in a 4,000-credit suit and stayed there. What the recording shows in that 4th hour is this: a white shape in the dark, moving 1 body length across the floor of a stone room over the course of 9 minutes, in the manner of something that has learned that fast movement is punished. It shows the chain dragging. It shows the head going down. It shows a child, absolutely still, talking quietly about nothing. About a dog named Bess that belonged to a man named Mr. Adebio. About the ice slide on Caveth 9. About her mother. About the fact that her mother used to hum when she wrote and it drove everybody mad. And it shows the enormous scarred muzzle of the Pale Warden come to rest, at last, in her lap. Nell put 1 hand on the great flat skull between the ears. Tio, she said, out loud clearly for the rule. I'm touching him now. I see you, Tio said. And then Nell Okoro-Vance said the sentence that 100 million people have since had tattooed on their bodies, and that is carved now in 9 languages over the door of the building that stands where the Ossuary Plaza used to be. Okay, Ghost, she said. This is going to hurt and then it's going to stop hurting for the rest of your life. Do you want me to do it? The warden did not move. And then, very slowly, with the chain dragging on the stone, he rolled a hand's width, then more, then over, until the ruined left shoulder was turned up toward the light and exposed to a room full of the species that had ruined it. He put his chin on the floor. And he waited. They did it there on the stones, with a child's hand on his head. The surgeon came in on her knees, 1 meter at a time over the course of 40 minutes, and did the entire procedure kneeling, with a local block and no sedation, because he would not have the mask, and because he did not, in the end, need it. He screamed twice. Both times, Nell put her forehead down against his and did not let go, and both times he made himself be still again. And the surgeon, a Bethune of 200 years, of the order that had written * no intervention indicated on his chart in the year 1109, worked with tears running out of her eye plates and did not stop. The landstip came out at the 9th hour. It was 41 centimeters long. It was black and pitted, and it stank. The surgeon held it up, and then set it down on the stone, and sat back on her heels, and put her 4 hands flat on the floor of the hold, and lowered her head to the ground in front of the animal she had been trained to call an animal. "I did not look," she said. "I am so sorry I did not look." And the Pale Warden of Iscarvell raised his head from Nell Okoro-Vance's lap, and looked at the Bethune on the floor of his cell for a long moment, and licked the sand and blood from his own mouth, and made a sound that was not one of the 6, and put his head back down. By the next morning his fever had broken. By the 3rd day he was standing. On the 5th day he walked the length of the hold on 4 legs evenly for the first time in 11 years, and turned around and walked back and looked at Nell, and did it again, and he kept doing it, back and forth, faster, until the chain snapped taut and rang like a struck bell, and Nell laughed out loud and clapped her hands and broke Rule 5 completely, and did not care. "He's showing off," said Sethu Voraneth from the doorway. She had not stopped crying since the 6th hour. "He is * showing off. Do you understand what he is doing? He is telling her he is well. In the ethnographies it is what an Ossuary does to say, 'I am strong again, do not carry me.'" "Yeah," said Nell, who had not read the ethnographies. "I know. Look at his face." The vote was in 4 days, and the preservation faction had the numbers, and everybody knew it. They had spent the 9 days doing the arithmetic of decency. Every fold that had ever sent a delegation to the right, every world that had ever cheered, every chancery office that had ever stamped the word * non-semantic on a file. The motion was gentle, and it was final. The animal designated Pale Warden shall be released from suffering. It had 409 co-signatories, and a memorial fund, and a statue commissioned from a very good sculptor, and the vote would be taken in the Grand Assembly of the 9 Suns with the whole galaxy watching, and it would pass, and then everyone could be sorry forever without anyone having to be guilty. The humans had no vote. Humanity's petition had been withdrawn in front of 11,000 witnesses. Humanity had, in the exquisite language of the Chancery, * no standing. "Then we make standing," said Onvalo. He was in the cargo bay. He had been there for 6 days. He looked, Tio thought, like a building that had been condemned, and then decided to keep working anyway. "The Ledger Statute permits one thing," he said. "One. In 800 years it has never been invoked because it was written as a formality for the settlement of livestock disputes, and everyone forgot it was there." He put a single page on the table. "Any party to a right may petition the assembly for a reading of the sand. The warden was a party. He has never been permitted to answer." Ambassador Quan Marchetti stared at the page. "You want to call him as a witness?" "No," said Onvalo. "I want to call him as a * party *. There is a difference, and it is the entire case." He straightened, and for a moment the arbiter of the right stood in that cargo bay again, 2.5 meters of him, terrible and old. A witness is asked what he saw. A party is asked what he * wants. And if the assembly of the 9 Suns puts that question to him, if it opens its mouth and asks that question out loud, in front of 40,000 worlds, then it has already conceded that there is somebody in the room to ask. They'll never allow it. "They will allow it," said Onvalo, because they are certain he cannot answer, and because refusing would look like fear. His mandibles moved slowly. They have believed for 800 years that the sand is a ledger. Let them read it. Nell Okoro-Vance, sitting on the table with her boots swinging and her mother's notebook in her lap, said, "He'll need me in the room." "Child, he'll need me in the room, and I'll need to be where he can see me, and nobody is allowed to bring a coat." She looked up, sand in her hair, 8 years old. "And they can't chain him. If they chain him, he won't talk. He'll just do the 6 and wait like he's been doing for 61 years, and you'll all say, 'See, it's only an animal,' and you'll kill him, and that'll be that." The cargo bay was silent. "They will never," said Ambassador Quan Marchetti, faintly, "unchain the White Death of Iscarvel in the Grand Assembly of the Nine Suns." Tio Vance looked at her wife's daughter for a long moment. Then she picked up the page. "Sure they will," she said. "They just need to be shamed into it in public, which, as it happens, is the one thing my species is genuinely excellent at." The shaming took 11 hours, and it was not clever. They put out the telemetry. All of it, all 61 years, raw and unedited, with the linguistic mapping laid over it in 9 languages. The grammar, the witness marking, the narrative past, and the 6-note hearth call at lights out, and the 14 seconds of silence after it, every night, 22,265 nights, for a room with nobody in it. They released it with no commentary and no argument, and they let the Concord of Nine Suns sit alone in the dark with it. And then Nell Okoro-Vance, 8 years old, sat down in front of a single camera in a cargo bay with sand still in her hair, and said one thing. "He said hello to me," she said. "Every night for 61 years he said hello, and nobody said it back. That's all, that's the whole thing. Nobody said it back." Within 30 hours, the Preservation Faction's motion had lost 211 co-signatories, and the Chancery announced, with the gravity of a body pretending it had never considered anything else, that the Assembly would hear a reading of the sand. The Grand Assembly of the Nine Suns convenes in a hall shaped like the inside of a shell, 900 meters across, with 60,000 seats rising in a spiral, and at the bottom of it, at the very center, a floor of plain gray stone with no rail around it. They had argued about the chain until the last hour. In the end, it was not Anvalo who broke it, and it was not Tio, and it was not the humans. It was the Vethun surgeon, whose name was Rel Othmanavar, and who walked to the Chancery bench with the 41-centimeter landstip in her hands and set it down on the wood in front of 400 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and said, "This was in his shoulder for 11 years. I put it there. My order put it there, and then we wrote in his file that no intervention was indicated, and then we sent children out onto his sand and called him the monster." She looked up. "You will not chain him. You have chained him for 61 years, and it has taught you nothing. Chain me if you require someone in the room to be chained. I have earned it, and he has not." They unchained the Pale Warden of Iscarvel at the 9th hour of the cycle, in the stone hold beneath a plaza that no longer had a purpose, and it took 4 surgeons and a plasma cutter to get the collar off, because the weld was 61 years old and had grown into him. When it came away, he did not move for a long moment. Then he lifted his head, all the way up, higher than he had lifted it since the year 1109, and turned it slowly from side to side, feeling the weightlessness of his own throat, and made a low sound that Sethu Voraneth could not translate and never tried to. Nell put her hand on his neck, where the fur had worn away to bare gray hide in a band as wide as her forearm. "Come on, Ghost," she said. "Let's go and tell them." 60,000 delegates watched him come up the long ramp into the Grand Assembly, and not one of them made a sound. He came slowly, because he was old, and because his shoulder was 2 weeks out of surgery, and because he had not walked further than 9 meters in 6 decades. He came unchained, unmuzzled, unhandled, and he came at the pace of the 8-year-old human girl walking beside him with one hand resting lightly on his shoulder blade, not holding, not leading, just resting, the way you rest a hand on a friend in a crowd. Behind them, at a distance of 4 meters, walked Nell Okoro-Vance, with a broken ankle in a brace and empty hands and her heart in her mouth, keeping exactly the distance she had promised to keep. She had said the words to Nell that morning, in the corridor, and she had meant every one of them. "If I say out." "I come out," Nell said. "I know, Tio. I know. You listen for me. I always listen for you." And Nell had reached up and taken her aunt's face in both hands, the way Adiz used to, and Tio Vance had to turn around and put her forehead against the cold stone of the corridor wall for a while afterward. They stopped at the center of the floor. The Pale Warden looked up at the spiral of 60,000 seats rising into the dark, at the 40,000 worlds, at the Concord of Nine Suns entire, and every being in that hall who had ever watched him crawl across the sand on his belly toward a child's open hand felt the floor of their civilization move very slightly under them. Arbiter said Anvalo, stripped of office, permitted to speak by the vote of a bare majority, standing in a plain gray robe with no folds in it at all, rose from the well of the assembly. "Speaker of the Nine," he said, "the Ledger statute provides that any party to a right may be heard. The Concord has held for 8 centuries that this creature is not a party but an instrument. That question is now before you, and it will not be settled by my testimony, or by the humans, or by the 4,000 hours of recording you have all now heard and cannot unhear." He turned. "It will be settled by him. Ask him." "Ask him what Arbiter." The speaker's voice came down from the high bench, dry as paper. "You would have this assembly interrogate a." "Ask him what he wants," said Anvalo. "That is all. That is the entire question. A hammer does not want anything." His mandibles opened. "Ask him." And in the ringing hollow of the Grand Assembly of the Nine Suns, in front of 60,000 delegates and a live feed reaching 40,000 worlds, the Speaker of the Nine, who did not believe it for 1 second, who was certain, who was safe, leaned forward to the pickup and said, with the weary contempt of 800 years, "Very well, creature, what do you want?" Nell Okoro-Vance took her hand off his shoulder and stepped back. That was the hardest thing she ever did, harder than the sand, harder than the hold. She stepped back 3 paces on the gray stone and put her hands behind her back and let him stand alone in front of them, because Rule 1 is that you cannot make a wild thing anything. You can only make yourself safe enough to be chosen. And because he was not her animal, and never had been, and the whole point, the entire point, the thing she had understood on the sand before anybody else in the galaxy had understood it, was that he was a person. And a person answers for himself. "Go on," she said quietly. "I'm right here, I'll answer." The Pale Warden of Iscarvel stood in the center of the Grand Assembly. And he spoke. It came out of him low and enormous, a sound that started somewhere below hearing and rose, 6 notes and then 6 more and then a phrase that unrolled and unrolled, structured, cased, marked, ancient asterisk, a language that had not been spoken aloud to another living soul since a woman on a transport put her hands over her son's ear plates and told him it was only animals, and the translation banks of the Concord of Nine Suns, freshly loaded, still hot, rendered it in 900 languages into 60,000 ears and 40,000 worlds, and this is what it said. "I am Ovixareth Hune, fire kept through winter, of the 9th hearth of the long water, son of Marisareth, who is dead. I have been alone for 61 winters. Every night I have called my hearth, and no one has answered. The hall did not breathe. Here are their names." And he said them. He said them for 1 hour and 40 minutes without stopping, and the Grand Assembly of the Nine Suns sat and listened to everyone, because not one being in that chamber could have stood up and walked out, and afterward it was found that the Speaker of the Nine had gripped the edge of the high bench so hard that the wood had split. 416 names. His hearth and his hearth's hearth, and the ones from the ridge, and the ones from the ice and the pups. He gave them in the witness case. I saw this, every single one, because he had seen every single one from the third transport, from the ice, from the surface, in the last winter of Iscarvel. He named his mother last. Then he was quiet for 14 seconds. Everyone in the hall counted them. Nobody had to be told what the 14 seconds were for. And then Ovixareth-Hune, called the Pale Warden, called the White Death, called the last ghost of Iscarvel, turned his ruined red eyes up to 60,000 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and answered the question he had been asked. You ask what I want. For 61 winters I wanted to open your throats. I am old now, and I have been very tired for a long time, and I will tell you the truth. I did not stop wanting it because I forgave you. I stopped wanting it because a cub sat down in front of me. She did not come to fight me. She did not come to feed me. She came, and she was afraid, and she sat down in my sand and made herself small and put her hand where I could reach it, and she yawned badly, and she waited for me to say that it was all right. No one has waited for me to say anything in 61 winters. She answered my hearth call. She did not know what it was. She answered it anyway because she is of a people who answer. So, here is what I want. And the last Iscari alive turned his head and looked at a human child standing 3 paces behind him with her hands behind her back, and the translation banks of the Concord of 9 Suns rendered his voice into 60,000 ears. I want the pit filled in. I want the name of my hearth in your archives, in the case of the witnessed, where you wrote non-semantic with your own hands. I want no cub of any people ever again walked out onto sand to be eaten so that you can feel large. And I want to keep the name she gave me. She calls me Ghost. It is a poor name. She is 8 and she is not a poet. But every other name I have was left to me by the dead, and that one was given to me by the living, and I am going to keep it until I die, and you will use it when you speak of me. There is no record of who stood up first. The recordings are unclear, and 60,000 delegates have made 60,000 claims, and the truth is probably that it happened everywhere at once, the way a wave does not begin anywhere in particular. The Grand Assembly of the 9 Suns rose to its feet, tier by tier, spiral by spiral, 40,000 worlds worth of ambassadors and prefects and archivists and folds, and it stood, and it made no sound at all, because the conquered does not cheer. And then somebody in the 9th tier, a naturalist, put back her head and answered the hearth call. 6 notes, badly, wrong pitch, wrong throat, 6 notes. And the delegate beside her did it, and the row, and the tier. And then 60,000 beings from 40,000 worlds stood in the Grand Assembly of the 9 Suns, and called the roll of the 9th hearth of the long water in an alien tongue they could not pronounce, for an hour and 12 minutes, until the walls of the shell rang with it. And the old white wolf stood in the middle of it with his head up, and his eyes closed and let them. Nell Okoro-Vance walked forward then, and put her arms around as much of his neck as she could get, and buried her face in his fur, and finally, at last, after all of it, cried like the child she was. And T.O. Vance came the last 4 meters and got down on the floor beside them both, and put one arm around the girl and one hand flat on that vast white shoulder, on the scar over the place where the lance had been, and held on. The vote was taken the following day, and it was not close. The right of the Pale Warden was abolished by a margin of 59,104 to 11, and the 11 were entered by name into the record at their own request, which is a thing the conquered does, and which those 11 names have not recovered from in the generation since. The Ossuary Plaza was filled in. Not burned, not blasted, filled, by hand, over 61 days, 1 day for every year, by volunteers who came from every fold in the Concord and stood in line for the privilege of carrying a bucket. The white sand was gathered up and taken home to Iscarvel and given back to the ice. The statute that replaced the rite is 11 lines long. It is engraved over the door of the Hall of the Long Water, which stands now where the pit was, and it holds that no member of any petitioning species may be required to prove anything by suffering, that the young of a people are not currency, and that any being who keeps a record of its dead in any form, by any means, in any tongue, is a person asterisk, and the burden of proving otherwise lies forever with the one who wishes to put on the collar. Everyone calls it Nell's Law. Nell has spent 20 years telling people patiently into every microphone that has ever been put in front of her that it should be called Ghost's Law, and that she did not write it, and that all she did was sit down. Nobody listens. It is the only argument she has ever lost. Sedonvallo was tried and refused counsel and pleaded guilty to everything he was charged with and several things he was not, and served 9 years. He spent them writing. The result is 4,000 pages long, and it is not an apology because he refused to write an apology. He said an apology was a thing you offered to someone who could hear it, and 416 people could not. It is record every right. Every name of every offering of every species, going back 800 years, dug out of the chancery basement by an old Vethun with no office and no mantle and a great deal of time. He sent the first copy to a stone hold on Thring Caveth, before it was demolished, addressed to Ovixareth Hune of the Ninth Hearth. Ghost could not read it. Iskari have no writing, they carry it all in the mouth. But he had it read to him, all 4,000 pages over 11 months, by a girl with sand still, somehow permanently in her hair. At the end of it, he said one sentence, and Nell wrote it in the green notebook, in the back, in handwriting that was getting more like her mother's every year. Tell the old one his singing was not nothing. The ship went to Iscarvel in the spring of the following year. They did not find survivors. Everyone knew, going in, that they would not. 61 years is a very long time, and the Concord had been thorough, and Ghost himself had said I saw this 416 times in front of 60,000 witnesses. But they found the hearths. They found the ridge and the long water, and the stone rings where the ninth hearth had slept, and Ovixareth Hune walked into the middle of them, old and stiff and free, and stood for a long time in the falling snow. And then he put his head back and called the roll, all 416, once, in the place where they had been alive. And Nell Okoro-Vance, 9 years old, in a survival suit 2 sizes too big, stood beside him in the snow and answered every single one. That took 2 days. She lost her voice on the second day. She kept going anyway, in a rasp, in a whisper, and T.O. Vance stood behind her with a thermos and a blanket and did not once say out. Nell is 28 now. She holds the chair of comparative ethology at the university on Thring Caveth, which is a strange thing to say about a station that used to have a pit in it, and she has her mother's field notebook in a case on her desk, open to the inside front cover, where 5 rules are written in a dead woman's terrible handwriting. Students come from 40,000 worlds to look at it. Most of them cry. She lets them. She is not a hero, she says. She says this constantly to journalists, to first-year seminars, to the small delegations of Vethun children who are brought to see her every spring. She says, I was 8, and I was so frightened I could not feel my hands, and I sat down because my legs were going. That is all courage is, most of the time. It is not feeling brave. It is doing the next thing while you are not feeling brave. Ghost lived 19 more years. He died in the snow on Iscarvel, on the ridge above the long water in his own country, on a clear day with his head in her lap. And she was 27 years old, and she held him, and she did not let go. And the last thing he ever said, the translation bank's report, was 6 notes. The hearth call. And she answered it, and he heard her, and then he went. They ask her, they always ask her, every interview, every single time, because it is the thing the galaxy has never gotten over. What it was like to walk out onto that sand at 8 years old, in front of 11,000 people, to be eaten. And Nell Okoro-Vance always says the same thing, and she says it patiently, and she says it with her hand resting on a battered green notebook, and she says it because it is true. They all thought they were watching a monster meet a little girl, she says. They were. They had it exactly backwards is all, and the moment we sat down together in that white sand, 40,000 worlds finally had to look at which of us was which.